Everyone on this beautiful day, I just like to share. I just think about, Paul talks about don't nothing good dwell in our flesh. The flesh is destructive, and it is. I just think about the flesh messes up. It just messes up so many relationships, so many marriages. Because one thing about this flesh, somebody in that marriage, somebody got to be willing to die to this flesh. Somebody got to be willing to decrease and allow Jesus Christ to increase. And you got to be persistent with it. You got to be consistent and persistent with dying to the flesh. Because if you got, a mate and one of them is not as strong as you in the, spirit, and they still allowing the enemy to, use their flesh, to come at you, then someone has to be the one to allow Jesus Christ, glory be to God, to get the battle, to get the victory over that flesh in that marriage, in that relationship, friendship, whatever it is. If you really, really, desire it, especially I'm talking about marriage right now. I'm really emphasizing on marriage because one thing about it is, the enemy, he hates marriage. He does. He hates it with a overall passion. And so the one thing about it is, when people are complaining to me about their marriage, first thing I ask, do you want the marriage? Do you really want the marriage? And they say, yeah. I said, well, something, you got to be willing to die. You got to be willing to die to your flesh. That's all it is to it. You got to be persistent because I know I'm to the point. I don't mind being transparent because I understand and know. Hindsight. A lot of times we wish we can go back and take things back and do things over again. You can't. And I see so many people destroying their marriages in the church, a part of the church, because someone's not willing to just die to their flesh and allow, Jesus Christ, glory be to God, to have a victory in that marriage and show himself strong. I just thought I'd just like to emphasize on that. Someone has to die. Someone has to decrease and allow Jesus Christ to increase. Amen. Have a wonderful and blessed rest of your day.